Hello, my name is Bash Harry, and thank you so much for clicking onto this video, and thank you so much for watching A Splash of Sea about the Brunei writers. We are a community organization created by writers for writers, and our main aim is to feature upcoming writers and to bring visibility to the creative literature scene here in Brunei with support, love, and new opportunities. When SIPA Remo approached us to do SIPA Remo, again, we were so honored, and we wanted to make a video to discuss about poetry in Brunei. Admittedly, that was a little bit of a difficult topic to encroach on because poetry in Brunei is so interesting, to say the least. It is small, but it is growing, and we didn't believe that we were the person or the people capable of having this discussion alone. So instead, we wanted to ask other people to help us define it. So please welcome our interviewees.
Hello, my name is Aisha Fikriya. I am a student, full-time student, also going through internship right now, and I started writing as a hobby. Now I make writing as a side income. I just have my debut stage on 3rd June last time, and now I just continue writing as normal.
Hi, my name is Nur Akila Ali. You can call me Akila. I am actively involved in the arts and culture sector in Brunei. That includes my work with Creative Economy Week, Spectrum, the Tiny Lit Fest. But it's all currently on pause at the moment because I'm currently doing a master's in cultural and creative industries in the UK, which basically just means that I study the business of creativity, and I hope that I can better help develop the creative industry in Brunei.
My name is Katharina. I am a writer. So my first novel, The Fisherman King, was published by Epigram in Singapore, and it was shortlisted for the Epigram Books Fiction Prize. I also published a second novel with Epigram in 2022. In my day job, I am an academic, so I specialize in creative writing and literature, and I work at the local university.
Hi, I'm Sally Honey Husband, the founder and CEO of the Honey Bookstore, or also known as the Honeybee Inn. I've been working on the Honey Bookstore since 2019, ever since we had our physical bookstore. And now we've grown from just a tiny little space to now slightly bigger, and we're hoping to bloom even more.
Hi, my name is Lin Wong. I'm currently 24 years old. I'm currently pursuing my master's in English Literature by Research in the University of Brunei Darussalam. I enjoy writing, and I've been doing it ever since I'm in high school and till this day.
My name is Haris Fadila. I'm currently working in the public sector. I have a poetry book called Flowers in the Chakrawala. It was released in 2019, I think. And another poetry zine called Cut Flowers. I also have a book of poems by Bruneian poets in Brunei. I was one of the contributors, and the book was called Bubbly Thoughts for the Stone-Hearted by Parable Studios. I feel like Brunei has something to contribute, something to say. What's unique about it is that we have a lot of culture, we have a lot of history that hasn't really been talked about yet. I know that some people might say that Brunei may not have as much of may not have a lot to say, but I feel like we do. We all have our own unique experiences that needs to be conveyed.
So the last book that I read that featured a Bruneian story was The Witch Doctor's Daughter by Katharina Muhammad Dawit. And I think it was that book that made me realize a few things. Number one, I really like culturally specific Bruneian stories. And number two, that I gravitate towards works in general that are written or delivered in the English language. So I'd say that my exposure to creative literature in Brunei is limited, but I have made the conscious decision to consume more Malay works. But of course, the journey of language reclamation has just started for me.
What are my thoughts on poetry in Brunei? Poetry in Brunei obviously has a very long tradition, dating back all the way to the Islamicization of Brunei with kind of epic poems like Syair Awang Semaun, Syair Rakis, and one of the iconic kind of texts of modern Bruneian literature is Syair Rakis, which was published in 1845. And since then, Bruneians have produced a lot of poetry, but prior to the 1940s, not a lot of it was documented or archived, because they were often in the 1940s and 1930s produced specifically for poetry events, and it was only in the 1940s that they began to be published in kind of magazines, newspapers, and so on. And I see a lot of echoes of that in today's Bruneian poetry scene, that a lot of poetry is produced for poetry events in particular, but not a lot of it is kind of preserved or archived. I see a little bit more of it in social media, so I love that young local poets are creating pages specifically for their work. I do wish a lot more of it was in print, but maybe that's just the way that poets are engaging with medium these days.
Back in the earlier days, when I first started off, it was just a handful of people that was in the creative literary community. Very, very small. Like they know one another. But now, as the years progress, it started to grow slowly. It's still a niche market, but it's going somewhere. It's there. It's growing. You just need the right kind of people to connect with. You just need to know who you're talking to and give them that, ounce of opportunity and give them the sense of confidence that maybe there will be more out there. There's still a lot of like great writers out there who are waiting for that, boost of confidence and to get out of their comfort zone, because we really don't know how much of the people here are young poets, but there is a potential that there's a growing community.
As I've mentioned, I've started writing since high school. It has actually just like a full-on passion thing where I just feel like writing is a good way for me to pour out my emotions, my feelings, to some sort of like a diary kind of format. But as I move on, I begin to be more confident in sharing my stories or my writings, even my poetry online. And since then, it has just grew into like a big, incredible, massive thing that allows me to gain more connections with other people and allow people to share their feelings as well. And I think that's really inspiring and really incredible.
As mentioned, Brunei does have historical background when it comes to poetry, whether it will be in our local poetry based in Malay like Pantun, or even as it's growing and slowly engaging with a global audience. Poetry has been shaped quite a lot over the recent years, and the current phase of poetry in Brunei is no different.
Because from my perspective, as someone who tries to be involved, who teaches creative writing and who tries to attend local literary events, I would characterize the local poetry scene that I see as very young, both young in development and young in terms of the people who are producing poetry. It is a very young demographic. Obviously, there are a lot of older poets who are still active, and I don't see actually a lot of interaction between kind of the older poets and the younger poets. So that's interesting to me. I do think that the young poets are seeking community, which is why these poetry events are held. Like, they're looking for people who are also serious about writing, serious about craft. But yes, generally that's how I would characterize the poetry scene in Brunei at the moment. And I know in the Malay literature scene, for example, especially in like historically, they've been concerned with Bruneian literature as part of the Malay literary scene, and often Brunei literature was not included in studies of Malay literature, which local literary scholars have tried to correct. What is unique about Bruneian poetry today? I think it's hard to identify a uniqueness of pattern because most of the poets, although they seek community, I think tend to be writing alone, so kind of alone together. I don't think they draw very much on traditions of poetry in Brunei. I don't see a lot of harking back to traditional forms of literature, for example, traditional poetic forms like pantun or syair. And of course, there's also the language situation where a lot of poetry can be bilingual, either Malay or English and so on. But when I was trying to think about what is unique about Bruneian poetry today, I was thinking that maybe what is unique is its involvement in regional or global poetic scenes. So a lot of the influences are coming internationally. And I think that Bruneian writers in general definitely see themselves as part of an international literary community rather than tied to a local literary community. So maybe that is something that's quite unique.
I think in Brunei, it's great because kami boleh cakap bahasa Melayu, kami boleh writing in English as well. People understand that. In Brunei, it's advantage for us untuk talking or thing in English and also in Malay. Also, Brunei are acceptance toward this writing things, kan? Macam we don't have any kepayahan dalam menulis like that. So I think it's nice because people are still accepting walaupun macam not having a format dalam writing, they still accept.
Right now, I would have to say that poetry, although it started on paper, it has increasingly becoming more vivid and more available online, especially through social media, where poets can actually share their own works and then they can actually share their artistic opinions and perspectives with each other. And till now, even in Brunei, you can see these connections grew through spoken word performances and like virtual Zoom events like Siporaimo and so on. So I think it's really incredible that it has become more of an international thing rather than like a local thing. It's slowly brewing to be a big thing in Brunei, and I hope to see it grow.
With the poetry community, I see them for myself that they are raw. They're open to improving themselves and seeing some potential out of it. Because I won't say that they're like the best out of the best just yet. There is potential for their work. It's just something that they need mentorship. They need some inspiration from people who know their craft well, because from the ones that I've worked with, especially writers and poets, they're only self-taught, which is something that is captivating for me because like they weren't taught like in classes or whatnot. They're mainly like they learned it as they go along and they catch up some verses and the trends going on. But I do see some potential in them to find their voice, to find something unique out of them. So what I can say overall is that it's raw. It's almost there. We just need the right kind of community that is like well experienced for them to harness their skills. And maybe, hopefully, one day they will finally publish their books and it can go Asian wide or worldwide.
I think what makes the creative industry in Brunei unique is that it's a creative industry operating within the Brunei specific cultural context. And the thing is, because of globalization and a few other things, we're so influenced by works from other countries that there's this sort of disconnect between creators, our heritage and culture, and audiences. But at the same time, there's an opportunity for the creative industry in Brunei to bridge all of that together, because there is a national agenda that wants to move towards economic diversification, right? And we've identified that creative industries, especially when you couple it with digital technologies, it's a potential growth cluster there. I think that means that the next 5 to 10 years is going to be very exciting for the cultural and creative industries in Brunei.
It is very true that social media has made poetry more accessible, not just in Brunei, but globally as well. One could argue it's the reasons why Rupi Kaur and Lang Leave have become popular, because their poems have become so relatable and accessible to the general audience. And whether you love them or hate them, you can't deny that their poetry has given recognition for the art form to the younger audience. And here in Brunei, I, as somebody who runs the Brunei Writers, we also notice the trends and we see how the international audience has reflected, or at least the international trends have reflected here in Brunei. But that being said, when you want to talk a little bit about how poetry and culture intersect, it's a little difficult to describe.
I feel like there's two sides of the literary scene, Malay literary scene and the English literary scene, and I don't normally see them like mingle with each other. I think because the content that they talk about is somewhat different, and I feel like the Malay literary scene has a bit more support than the English literary scene from the government, like the Dewan Bahasa Pustaka. They are a government body which kind of like supports Malay literary works and writers, but at the same time, with that support, it's not usually known to the public. I mean, like, it's coming from my perspective. I'm more in tune with the English literary scene, and I see a lot of the activity going on because I go to the events and all that stuff. The English literary scene, I feel like I'm maybe a bit biased, but a lot of Bruneians are moving towards that and are attracted to that, but that's just coming from me.
Historically, there's always been a division between Malay language and English language literature in Brunei. That's been exacerbated by kind of the limited avenues for publishing. This has changed kind of over the last 10 to 15 years, I would say, with the accessibility of digital mediums. So people can can self-publish, and a lot of English language writers have self-published, and those things are often available digitally. Malay language writing tends to be mostly available in print. So there's a huge difference in how accessible these two mediums are. I'm really curious about how this has replicated in poetry, because I see some efforts towards bilingual poetry, genuinely bilingual poetry, but I tend to think that the Malay language poets and the English language poets are still quite separate, both in their influences and the communities they inhabit, the conversations they're having. I would love to see a little bit more conversation between the two, and it's something that I see most of, not in novels or in short stories, but actually in theatre. I see a lot more bilingualism in theatre. So there's a lot more relationship between the two languages there.
We're missing a lot of key players for sure, across most creative industries in Brunei, if not all. And to this, I want to address the role of something called a cultural intermediary. And these are roles, people, organizations that sort of mediate the cultural product, meaning that between the production of this product, let's say a book, and the consumption of this book by audiences, these are the guys that go, okay, you want to write this book? Well, in order for me to do that, in order for you to help me help you do that, to sell this book, you got to make sure that your book is XYZ. And ideally, these are the guys who have a great understanding of the cultural producer's essence and the audience's taste. And because of that, they've become the sort of cultural gatekeepers too. You will have creators, you will have writers who publish their work by themselves. They can bypass these intermediaries because of digital technology. Let's say they post on Instagram to get their audience, but not a lot of creators know their audience's tastes too. Not a lot of creators know how to grow an audience. That's the role of these intermediaries, actually, to understand the creator, understand where they're coming from, and at the same time, expand their audiences so that there are people who can consume these works. That said, I believe that Brunei has a lack of these type of people who are able to understand the cultural producer and the audience. And I think it all goes back to our funny relationship with culture.
Uniqueness itu maybe because we can, like I said, languages. Even though you mix the language, people are still accept that dalam bahasa Melayu ke English, bahasa Melayu Brunei ke bahasa Melayu standard, people are understand that. So we have advantage for it. You know, it's a unique things in Brunei for that.
Poetry in Brunei, I would say it's very personal, very opinionated, and everyone is just sharing their own deeper stories and intimate tales they would have within themselves. And it's nice when you actually have a platform for everyone to talk about these things, be vulnerable. Because sometimes I think people would expect poetry, like prose and writings, to be intelligent, but sometimes it's best when it's vulnerable, when it's open, when it's not calculated. And you take risks in sharing these emotions with other people and then seeing how feedbacks come in and how people actually appreciate everything that you've poured out. And then it could be something that makes you feel like you're seen and connected and more bonded with other people.
As you can probably tell, everything going on in the world, it is very difficult to have a living wage just by being a creative. But that being said, I am optimistic. There are pockets here and there, not just in Brunei, but internationally as well, where we want more appreciation for arts and culture. And I'm hopeful about the new growth of poetry and the creative world in general. Where we are in Brunei now in terms of poetry is a complicated matter because there are historical ties and there is an understanding that we have poetry here that is so beautiful and rich, but it's not really shown to the global audience the way that maybe English poems are more accessible, especially from Brunei writers who write predominantly in English, who might have that accessibility by comparison to their Malay counterpart. But that being said, I do believe that there are pockets of community and growth. Creative arts in Brunei is, I would argue, still in its infancy. There needs to be more appreciation for the culture, but with that, and because we're so new and we're learning to grow, there is a freedom of exploration that I'm so excited to see what's going to happen in the future. So with that in mind, I wanted to ask, what would poetry look like in the future? What would the creative scene look like in the future?
It would be such a beautiful and a dream come true for most of us to work full time in working on their passion, because I am blessed to be working on my full-time job, my passion, growing my bookstore, and to see other creatives, other dreamers to make that come true, it'll be such a wonderful thing. So by saying that, it would be great to have job opportunities that is tied to the creative literature industry. So that way, people can see the potential that you can actually earn money out of it. You can actually earn a living out of it. So In saying that, what I mentioned previously before, maybe if there's a tight community or people helping each other out, the poets, the writers, the readers, maybe it could grow something more to make an industry out of it that can be a potential to bring the economy of Brunei up. So that is something that I would definitely want to see more of it. And we're doing our best in terms of with the bookstore and our nonprofit organization to make that happen. But it's still baby steps. But every step matters because we want to see the bigger picture of seeing the opportunity that lies ahead for the creative industry here in Brunei.
The Bruneian creative industry, I think, has so many ways that it could develop. I definitely see a trend towards producing and publishing one's own work because obviously you have a lot more creative control. But obviously it's also a lot harder, I think, for Bruneian writers to break into international markets except through the digitalization route. I'm interested in exploring as an academic, like how are writers writing for an international audience through these digital mediums, especially on Amazon, for example. Although I know there's a large community of fan fiction writers who already have kind of a global audience, right? So I think writing for an international audience will continue to be a big part of how Bruneian literature develops. But in the same way, I see a lot of Bruneian writers who are less interested in writing for an international audience and more writing to each other. I'm not seeing a lot of it in print yet, but I definitely hope to see a lot more of that. And I think local publishing houses will have a big part to play in that.
I would love to see more capacity building programs for writers, publishers, any stakeholder really in the Brunei literature scene. And I think it'd be great if these programs are also culturally immersive. So we're not talking about just upskilling writing talents, but also we're talking about expanding networks, creating more marketability, having more audience building programs, bridge audiences with creators, have all of these people appreciate the Brunei culture more. I would also love to see more Malay works being showcased and a variety of Bruneians involved, not just the English-speaking 20 to 30-year-olds. And I would also love to see our culture of pantun maybe revitalized in contemporary settings.
Well, I would like to see more content, obviously, more poets, more writers. I would love to see people write about things from their own experiences, not just in generic and general terms, because I see a lot of people who are into poetry and they write about love, they write about grief. But what I think is missing is like personal experiences. And I do find that it's hard to put in personal experiences into your own writings, maybe because you feel like when people read it, you might think that it might be controversial or too sensitive. But my idea of like writing is write whatever you want to write whatever you think is interesting, despite what other people might think. You don't write for other people, you write for yourself.
Having a more bigger stage for us like that, it's not just a poetry itself, it's maybe kind of combinations, theater and poetry, maybe like that, or what I do with poetry and song, and a poetry that mixes as a theater, maybe like that. So I hope that's what having in Brunei lah in the future.
What I wish to see more in Brunei's literary scene is the strong spirit and confidence that would be implemented within their works and themselves. Because what I see is most often people, they have the passion, they love to write poetry, they love to put things out there, but what is stopping them are their insecurities and their doubts. But they do have the talent. So with events like Siparaimo or the Brunei Writers, everyone can come together and work on their confidence and showcase their works.
It's pretty clear that there is an isolation between Malay writers and English writers when it comes to their work. Being a writer is a very isolated hobby career. We don't tend to mingle about, but that's where it's so important to build a community, whether in your country or your region. There are three things I look forward to in the future, especially when it comes to poetry in Brunei. The first is more of a connection, collaboration, community, the big three C's when it comes to Malay-based poets and English-based poets. I want to see that collaboration, that communication, that connection, because ultimately we are a bilingual society and I want to see that grow and evolve and collaborate more to create new pieces. I love it when I see Malay poets perform amongst their English peers and vice versa. So I hope to see that more in the future. Secondly, and I feel like a lot of creatives in general feel this way, we would love to see more appreciation for the arts. We always say that we want to support local, and it's true, we do. But I also think that's the caveat is they want it to be good. And I feel like as a creative myself and somebody who consumes local literature and local films and the creative arts, we don't give enough time and space to allow the creative industry to grow, to be something better, and to nurture that with the appreciation that it deserves, that it needs. And finally, one thing that I think a lot of the creatives and the interviewees we spoke to said, we hope to make the creative industry a viable career. It's important to be able to use this platform, the Brunei Writers, SIPA Remo, or just in general these organizations that help mediate and facilitate young minds or even older minds on how they want to create a career based on something that they love. How do we do that? I don't know. I don't have the answer for it. It's a long-winded, complicated answer that I'm sure much smarter people know about, but I don't. All I can say is this is just a current piece for the future of Brunei's poetry scene. I hope you guys enjoy, and I can't wait to see you guys at SIPA Remo. Bye! Oh, also check us out at the Brunei Writers on Instagram. That'll be cool. Thanks.